Okay, so in this series, we usually look at economic questions from, an Islamic perspective. But today, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're diving into a really influential and, frankly, fascinating secular field, the economics of religion. We're going to explore the tools it uses and some of the really powerful insights it's been able to generate. It sounds kind of strange, right? I mean, how can you possibly use the cold, hard tools of economics to understand something as personal and profound as faith? Well, it might seem like a paradox, but that's exactly what's happening. Economists are using everything in their toolkit. We're talking game theory, advanced econometrics, you name it, to analyze religious behavior and its massive impact on society. And listen, for anyone doing research in this area, getting a handle on this field is absolutely critical. Why? Because its findings are shaping some of the biggest academic and policy conversations out there about religion's role in the world. All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to map out this whole intellectual landscape. We'll kick things off by defining what this field even is. Then we'll get into the core theories, both macro and micro. After that, we're going to tackle a really tough nut to crack, the challenge of proving causality. And we'll wrap up by looking at how all this applies to some major issues in economic development. Let's get into it. Okay, first things first. Before we go any further, we really need to get a clear definition of what we're talking about here, what this field is, and just as importantly, what it isn't. So this is a really crucial distinction we have to make right up front. What we're focusing on today is the economics of religion. Think of it as a branch of standard economics that just happens to be studying religious behavior. It's all about positive analysis, what is. Now, that's completely different from religious economics, which is where Islamic economics fits in. That's a normative project. It's about using religious sources to say what an economic system should be. Two very, very different things. Now, you might think this is a brand new idea, but the roots go way back. I mean, we're talking about Adam Smith himself back in 1776, looking at religious groups through the lens of market competition. Then you've got Max Weber, whose famous work on the Protestant ethic really paved the way for thinking about the economic impact of belief. But the field as we know it today, that really took off with Lawrence Iannacone's huge 1998 article. That's what put the new economics of religion on the map for everybody. All right, let's move on to one of the biggest ideas in this field, a real macro-level concept. It's this pretty provocative idea of looking at religion as, well, a competitive marketplace. So this leads us to a huge question that social scientists have been debating for ages. Is economic growth killing religion? You've probably heard of the classic secularization hypothesis, right? The idea that as societies get richer and more modern, religion just sort of fades away. But here's the thing. Is that what the data actually shows? Yeah, for decades, this was pretty much the accepted wisdom. The thinking was that science and rational thought would just naturally replace faith. But the economics of religion comes along and throws a really interesting wrench in the works by shifting the focus away from just the demand side of the equation. And this, right here, is where the whole debate gets flipped on its head. Is religiosity going down because people just want it less, a decline in demand? Or could it be a supply problem? Maybe religious organizations get lazy, they stop innovating, especially when they have a monopoly or are heavily regulated by the state. It's a total reframing of the question. And what's fascinating is that there is a ton of evidence pointing to this supply-side story. It turns out that having lots of religious options, a competitive market, doesn't necessarily make people less religious. In fact, it often seems to boost participation. On the flip side, when the government gets too involved creating monopolies, well, that tends to stifle everything. The go-to example here is always the US, with its super dynamic and competitive religious landscape, compared to parts of Western Europe, where you have these established, state-regulated churches and, well, much lower levels of religiosity. Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, the macro market. Now let's zoom right into the micro level. We're going to look at individual religious groups through a very specific economic lens, as a club. This model, which again comes from Iannacone, is just brilliant. The idea is that religious groups provide what economists call club goods, things everybody in the group benefits from, like community support, spiritual guidance, even a form of social insurance. But as soon as you have that, you run into a classic economic problem, the free rider. The person who wants all the benefits without putting in any of the work. So how do you solve that? And this is where it gets really clever. This model explains the economic logic behind why some religions are so strict. You look at things like dietary laws or distinctive clothing, and from the outside, it might seem inefficient, But from an economic standpoint, it's a genius screening device. These costly sacrifices raise the price of admission, so to speak. They filter out the people who aren't really committed, the free riders. What you're left with is a group of highly dedicated members, which means the group can provide much better goods and support for everyone who's all in. So the key takeaway here is pretty counterintuitive. From this economic view, all that sacrifice and strictness, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's a way to invest in the quality of the group itself, and it's what helps build these incredibly strong, vibrant, and committed communities. Now, of course, making big claims like these means you need solid proof. And that brings us to what is, without a doubt, the single biggest challenge in this entire field: proving that religion is the cause of an outcome, not just correlated with it. This is what economists call the endogeneity problem, and it's a real headache. Let's take an example. Say you find that religious people have higher incomes. Great, but what's causing what? Does being religious make you wealthier, or do people who are struggling financially tend to become more religious? Figuring that out, disentangling cause and effect, is absolutely everything. And to do that, researchers have to jump through some serious statistical hoops. You've got reverse causality, which we just talked about. Then there's the problem of omitted variables. Maybe some third thing, like culture or social trust, is driving both religiosity and the economic outcome. And you've also got self-selection bias. Maybe the kinds of people who choose to be religious are just different in ways we can't easily measure. It's tough stuff. But this is where the field gets really, really creative. To get around these problems, economists look for what they call natural experiments. And a fantastic example of this is using the timing of Ramadan. Think about it. Because the Islamic calendar is lunar, Ramadan moves through the seasons year by year. This shift has nothing to do with the economy. It's exogenous. So researchers can use this to isolate the true causal effect of intense religious observance on things like GDP, student test scores, you name it. It's a really clever research design. Okay, for our last section, let's bring all these tools to bear on the developing world. We're going to look at religion's complex role here: conflict, cooperation, finance. Because in places where government institutions are weak or don't exist, religious organizations often step in to play this massive role in coordinating everyday life. And let's be clear, we are not talking about a niche issue here. Just look at the numbers. The vast majority of people on this planet identify with a religion. And the places where religion is most concentrated and growing fastest, that's in the developing world. So if you want to understand global development, you absolutely have to understand the economic function of religion. When you look at it through this economic lens, you see that religion is really a double-edged sword. On one hand, it can be this incredible engine for cooperation. It builds trust, creates trade networks, provides schools and hospitals when the state can't. But on the other hand, those same powerful, tight-knit networks can be mobilized for conflict, for political struggles, and for violence. And for a perfect historical example of religion providing an innovative economic solution, we need to look no further than the Islamic institution of the Waqf. You see, the Waqf was basically this ingenious institutional response to a huge economic problem: insecure property rights. By putting assets into a perpetual trust protected by religious law, you created a stable way to fund all sorts of public goods. We're talking schools, hospitals, libraries, even bridges. For centuries, this was an absolute cornerstone of the economy in many Muslim societies. So when you step back and look at all this, it's clear that this economic lens gives us a really powerful but also a partial view. It does an amazing job of showing us the rational choices, the market dynamics, and the institutional logic behind religious behavior. But it also forces us to think about the limits of this approach. It makes you wonder, what parts of the human search for meaning, for the divine, will our economic models just never be able to capture? See you in the next one. Subscribe, like, and comment.